Ladies and gentlemen, as we speak at this very moment, 400 of the most important people on planet Earth, I'm of course talking about veteran baseball writers, are marching off to their mailboxes, and what do they find in a precious envelope? This very ballot. They get to vote for the 2025 Baseball Hall of Fame. I don't get to do that. I'm not a member of the BBWAA. Unless some of the rules change with that, I will never be a member, and I would have to be a member for at least 10 years to vote. They are very special. I am not special. I'm pathetic. I eat dirt. I'm a pathetic worm rooting around in the dirt. So hopefully I can at least talk about some of these players that our greatest heroes, 400 of them, get to vote for. We're going to talk about everyone on this ballot. We will start with the notable newcomers, and there is no newcomer more notable than Ichiro. Ichiro, my favorite player from my childhood, at least one that wasn't playing for the Braves. I loved Ichiro, came over from Japan in 2001 and just set the league ablaze, has all the markers you would look for in terms of the Hall of Fame. He is a member of the 3,000 hit club stateside, even though he only started at age 27, a 10-time All-Star, a Rookie of the Year and MVP winner in 2001, and in 2004, set the single-season hit record. This is the most underrated accomplishment in baseball of my lifetime. The single-season hit record belongs to Ichiro. This is not some he had the best strikeout-to-walk ratio in baseball history. Well, it's hits. It's the record for hits, all right? They've cared about hits the entire time this game has existed. They've cared about how many hits you have. When he broke this record, he broke a record that was 80 years old. When Maris or McGuire broke the single-season home run record, they were breaking 30-year-old records. This was an 80-year-old record. No one will get close to this ever again. 262 hits in a season. So that's Ichiro for you. The only real question here is, will he be unanimous? And I'm just going to go ahead and put it out there. I don't think so. There are some, sabermetric types that could try to take away from what he's done. For example, he has the same WAR as Bobby Abreu, who's on this ballot, and also an on-base percentage that is 40 points lower, only a 107 OPS plus, so he was an above-average hitter for his career, but I think maybe that batting average, doing a lot of work in terms of creating his slash line, the on-base percentage, and the 402 slug, they aren't incredible. They're lower than plenty of Hall of Famers. Never won a World Series. I think someone will find a way to hold something against Ichiro. Keep in mind, only 95% of the electorate voted for Adrian Beltre, so you would need 100% of them to vote for Ichiro for him to be unanimous. I think Albert Pujols has a better shot. I'd love to be wrong. I mean, for me, logically, if someone is a clear Hall of Famer like Ichiro is, then yeah, they should be unanimous, and probably there are, there's at least one person on the ballot every year who should be unanimous in some senses. So I have my doubts. I would point out to those people, look, he got started at age 27. He was tearing up NPB at age 20. If he gets over to MLB at age 22, he's like an 80 or 90 WAR player. He's basically Roberto Clemente at that point. I mean, he was such a good, defender in right field as well. So here's players, hitters since integration, amount of WAR accrued since age 27 or older. He's one of only 22 to do that. You can see the ones ahead of him aren't just Hall of Famers. They're, slam dunk Hall of Famers for the most part, except for Edgar Martinez, who took a while to get there. And then also, steroid guys like Barry Bonds or, Pete Rose, not a steroid guy, but, held out because he was scandalized. A really efficient base stealer, too. This is minimum 500 stolen bases. You can do all these searches yourself with StatHead code Foolish20, but the fourth most efficient base stealer of all time over, at least 500 steals. So Ichiro, great player. Actually, maybe not that interesting to talk about because, yes, he's going to be a Hall of Famer, and that's that. And the only real discussion here is, will he be unanimous? I'm going to put it out there. I think the answer is no. The next notable newcomer is CC Sabathia, who I also believe will be inducted into the Hall of Fame this year. I think he will be a first-year inductee. The key for Sabathia in his career, and look, he had a very nice peak. He was a very consistent pitcher. He won a Cy Young Award in 2007. He had an excellent 2008 as well. People will always remember the stretch he had for the Brewers in the second half, and he goes over to the Yankees. He wins the World Series in 2009. He had all this stuff going for him, but the real key for Sabathia is these last 5 years or so, because even though he didn't kill it, even though, over these last 5 years, he averaged 150 innings, he had a 4.14 ERA, a 4.58 FIP, a 1.04 ERA plus. These are essentially inning eatery type numbers. What he did by maintaining his relevance in his late 30s was he added on to the counting stats. He got enough wins to get up to 250. He got enough strikeouts to get up to 3,000. And that is ultimately the key to his induction. It seems kind of silly because I think a lot of people love the peak, right? They love the peak and they say, hey, if he had a Hall of Fame peak, he should be a Hall of Famer. But a lot of times it's just hanging around. And what he did is he hung around, he got those counting stats, and because of that, he's going to be a Hall of Famer. These are the pitchers in baseball history with at least 3,000 strikeouts and 250 wins. Hall of Famers. They're all Hall of Famers except for Roger Clemens, and he's not held out for performance reasons, right? He's held out for performance-enhancing drug reasons, but the rest are all Hall of Famers. No doubt. No doubt about that. So CC Sabathia, happy for him. Obviously, he had a nice story too because he suffered and struggled with alcoholism for a lot of his career and got sober. And so people like CC Sabathia. He's hung around kind of in the media world as well. So he's going to get in. I don't think there's any threat to be unanimous here. I think he'll probably get 80%. Just throwing it out there, but he's going to get in. I think he'll get in fairly comfortably, NBA first ballot Hall of Famer alongside Ichiro. And there is no better pitcher to compare CC Sabathia to on this ballot than the king himself, King Felix Hernandez, because King Felix Hernandez has every bit as much the peak of CC Sabathia, maybe more. Maybe it was an earlier peak, a Cy Young Award winner in 2010. But the thing with Felix is, and I think the question is going to be, did he do enough? Does he have enough here? 169 wins. I will point out CC Sabathia pitched for good teams, especially latter half of his career being on Yankees teams that were competitive every year. Felix pitched his entire career for the Seattle Mariners, and with all due respect, pretty much every year, they sucked. Their offense sucked. That's how he went 13-12 with a 2.27 ERA on his way to a Cy Young win and only 169 wins in his career. The thing about Felix is he didn't hang around. Sabathia hung around. Felix was done after age 33, and he was kind of cooked after age 30, so he did not get to hang around and put up those latter half of the career counting stats that help assist the earlier career peak. And I think what's going to happen in the next, let's say, 10 to 15 years is that these standards, the statistical standards for what a Hall of Fame starting pitcher looks like are going to have to drastically change, because you look around the league, you look at the injuries and lengthy injuries to Tommy John surgeries to top-tier pitching talent. The standards are really going to have to change, and I think it's sort of these pitchers like Felix who've been retired for a few years who may get screwed over, because I think if you compare the counting stats for Felix to guys who are coming after that Kershaw, Scherzer, Verlander, Greinke generation, which is going to hit the ballot in 5 or so years, right? After they retire, you look at those guys after that. After that, it's going to be Cole, DeGrom, Sale, like those kind of guys. Felix is going to have counting stat advantages, or at least be equal to a lot of those guys. But Felix, there's a good chance he won't get in. But in 10 to 15 years, when those guys hit the ballot and the standards change, then Felix is going to be kind of caught in this weird in-between. I think maybe Adam Wainwright, with his wins, with his 200 wins, is another example of a pitcher who could suffer for that. Because if you're asking the question, did Felix Hernandez do enough? He threw 2,700 innings. You know what active pitchers have thrown at least 2,700 innings? It's just these guys. It's just that Kershaw, Scherzer, Verlander, and we can throw Greinke in there as well, generation of guys that are going to be Hall of Famers, but then who comes after that, right? Because Felix is going to be right in line with those guys, with Sale, with DeGrom, with Cole, but there's a good chance he won't get in because the standards won't have changed enough. So I think it really, for him, starts with trying to break through and get at least 5% this year so he can hang around on the ballot. And hopefully in 10 years, maybe some of those guys are hitting the ballot for the first time, and then he can get kind of a critical reexamination of what he did, because he's, in terms of age, he's not even that different from those guys I'm talking about, the DeGrom, the Cole, the Sale type generation. It's just that he peaked earlier and, he was done by 2019. Next up, we've got a couple of catchers I'm going to lump in together because I think their careers are ultimately pretty similar. It is Brian McCann, and Russell Martin. They don't necessarily have the greatest of counting stats, even though for catchers that's not as important. You don't necessarily need to break, 2,000 career hits to really, hit the minimum for being considered, the same way a lot of non-catchers seem to have to do that. But Russell Martin, about 200 homers, a little under 1,500 hits. McCann, closer to 300 homers, 282, but about 1,600 hits. WAR is really what we need to discuss today, because McCann's at 32, Martin's at 39 approximately. The thing about Baseball Reference WAR is that it doesn't include a catcher framing component, which is fair in a lot of ways because, for example, most of the catcher framing metrics don't really exist until 2008 when we're in the pitch tracking era and we can track, what balls were called strikes and vice versa, and that's where you start to get some of that catcher framing data from. Framing, obviously an important tool for the modern catcher, and it's been important for every catcher throughout baseball history. It's definitely been spoken to as a skill. You can read newspaper articles, they talk about good receiving of the baseball, but because there's no catcher framing component in Baseball Reference WAR, if we look at catcher jaws here, which is kind of a combination of their total WAR as well as their WAR at their peak, you can see that McCann and Russell Martin just do not meet the Hall of Fame standard. They're the 35th best and 28th best catchers of all time, according to those standards. Now, if you flip over to Fangraphs, which does have the catcher framing component, all of a sudden we're talking about Russell Martin, the 11th best catcher by WAR, and Brian McCann 15th. And you look at these leaderboards, well, McCann's sandwiched between Joe Mauer and Mickey Cochran. Those are Hall of Famers. And you look at Russell Martin, he's ahead of a Hall of Famer in Ted Simmons, and he's behind a future Hall of Famer in Yadier Molina. They're really just very close to Molina and Posey in general, who will have no problem at all getting into the Hall of Fame. And yet it seems like these guys, if I had to predict, will probably be ignored. And the case for them would be the framing element. Now, here's the curious bit, and I think this is the obvious question which would come up, which is, of all these top catchers you see right here, wouldn't they all get a boost from the framing as well if they were so great? How would this catching leaderboard change if all of these catchers, like Johnny Bench, like Gary Carter, like Carlton Fisk, like Yogi Berra, were able to take credit for their ability to frame pitches? Wouldn't this leaderboard change drastically? And to be honest with you, I kind of feel like the answer is not as much as you would think, because, the average in this case is 0. What's being assumed is that Johnny Bench was a league average framer, and that Gary Carter was a league average framer, and that Carlton Fisk and Yogi Berra were league average framers. And I mean, I say this with all due respect to, those guys defensively and the reputations that they had, but I mean, a lot of, guys who had good reputations in the past as defenders, that doesn't really hold up under in terms of the advanced defensive metrics. And a lot of these guys played a long time, so maybe even if at their peak they were positive framers, later on in their career when they lost some of that athleticism, they could have very well been negative framers. So, I'm actually coming at this from the opinion that probably if those guys had access to their own catcher framing metrics, I don't think they would all get like a massive boost and just absolutely, dwarf guys like, Russell Martin and Brian McCann on the leaderboard necessarily. Do I think they have a good chance to get in because of this, completely fair argument? Not really. I mean, I think part of it is the position, right? We saw Mauer get in last year, and then Molina and Posey are coming down the pipeline. There's no real emergency, lack of Hall of Fame catchers at the moment. And so I think the voters could very well let Martin or McCann fall off the ballot in year one, but I do find them to be notable newcomers, mostly because of where they rank among catchers all time in F4. Because if you were just, a WAR literalist, and I don't, necessarily ascribe to that, then you could very easily make the argument that both these guys should be in the Hall of Fame. And the final notable newcomer is going to be Dustin Pedroia. I find Dustin Pedroia notable because I think in some ways he is the second base equivalent on this ballot to last year's third baseman David Wright. Similar reputations, both one club players, Wright with the Mets, Pedroia with the Red Sox. Sort of this similar reputation of, in their 20s, they were clearly having, a Hall of Fame type peak, and then injuries slowed them down ultimately in their 30s, and they were done, relative to their talent at least, at a relatively young age. Pedroia has some advantages over David Wright. He has a Rookie of the Year award and an MVP award. He played for 3 World Series winning teams. So in that sense, maybe he has even a little bit of an advantage, but Wright was a better hitter, and a lot of times the hitting sort of supersedes everything else when it comes to Hall of Fame voting. But I think Pedroia, because of the comparisons to David Wright, because of the accolades, because of the reputation, even though he fell short of, say 2,000 career hits, I think he's got at least a chance to hang around and get the 5% necessary. That's going to be about 20 votes out of approximately 400 needed to stay on this ballot. Our first category of returning players is what I call the trendy sabermetric darlings. Todd Helton graduated from this list last year because he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, so way to go, Todd Helton. Next to follow him, it seems, is Billy Wagner. Billy Wagner came through with 73.8% of the vote last year, so that's very close to the 75 threshold needed. And this is year 10 for him, and historically we've seen some major year 10 bumps, especially for guys in the trendy Saber Darling Club. Those are guys like Larry Walker and Edgar Martinez in recent years, getting huge boosts. So there's very little doubt in my mind that Billy Wagner is going to eclipse that 75% mark this year, because what happens is a lot of guys, they just won't vote for you for the first 9 years, and then baseball writers, because they're cowards, they're heroes, will flip in year 10 and change up the tune just a little bit. I think there are enough writers out there that'll happen with Billy Wagner. A lot of people in the sabermetric circles have been advocating for Wagner for years, and they've done a great job, and I think ultimately this is going to be the year it happens. I'd be shocked if he somehow didn't get the bump up from essentially 74% to 75%, given this is year 10 and the urgency that comes with that. 900 innings pitched, 900 of the greatest innings you'll ever see. That's basically the argument here, right? It's just inning by inning, no one more dominant than him except for maybe like Mariano Rivera at that point. So Billy Wagner, a preemptive congratulations to you. Hopefully this doesn't make me look stupid in a month. Next up in the trendy sabermetric darling club is Andruw Jones, who, curiously enough, this is his 8th year in the ballot. Okay, between year 5 and year 6, he went from 41% to 58%. That is a huge boost. He added plus 17% last year, so between year 6 and year 7, he goes from 58% to 62%. So he goes from adding plus 17% to plus 4%. So that may be a sign of some stagnation in terms of the voting. And that's kind of what I'm talking about at this point, because I've done this video for, 4 years now. You don't necessarily need to hear me say for the 4th time that Andruw Jones is the greatest defensive center fielder of all time and that he hit 434 career home runs. And if I told you, the greatest defensive center fielder of all time hit 434 home runs, you'd probably assume that this was a first ballot slam dunk Hall of Famer. You don't need to hear me tell you again that if his peak was simply ages 25 to 35, people wouldn't hold the fact that he was basically done being good after 30 against him. And that's just, he's a victim of that in a lot of ways. But yeah, that's what this is. This is analyzing the voting trend, and the question for him this year is, okay, can he get up to 66% in year 8 so he can get up to 70% in year 9 and then to 75 by year 10? Because it's slowing down. He was adding, but it slowed down last year, so we'll have to see how that goes for him. The tricky thing is there's not a lot of guys in recent years who have gotten in position players under 2,000 career hits, particularly non-catchers. Ralph Kiner is like an example of maybe the last time that happened on the writers ballot. There have been Veterans Committee that's happened for sure, but on the writers ballot, that's for some people that's a hard no to not have 2,000 hits despite everything else that he accomplished. The other thing that maybe should be more of a hard no, but I've never actually seen cited, is that Andruw Jones does have a arrest for domestic violence. And we will have a section of players that are scandalized one way or another after this. The reason he's not in there is because I can't recall a time where I've actually seen writers or a movement of writers come out against this and say, hey, I'm not going to vote for Andruw Jones because of his history of domestic violence. It's been performance based, if anything. So I don't know if it's maybe being held against him. Maybe it should be. I think that's completely fair to say maybe it should be. There's a character clause for a reason, but he's not in that sort of category of player for me because I just don't see it cited the same way. Obviously A-Rod with the PEDs, or even Omar Vizquel, whose candidacy is just pretty much dead in the water after was starting pretty good. So Andruw Jones, I think by performance, he should be a Hall of Famer. But the trend is that he was looking like he had good momentum, and then that kind of slowed down a little bit. So we'll have to see how he does this cycle. Next up, Bobby Abreu, who is somehow up to getting 15% of the votes. I'm shocked by that. I'm sure people are shocked that he's even hung around on the ballot this long, but he does have a very interesting and clear sabermetric argument to be made. A player with over 10,000 plate appearances and a .395 on-base percentage. He just lived on base. He was on base all the time. He has 60 WAR, which for a lot of people is when you start to really consider a player to be a Hall of Famer, is around 60 WAR if you care about WAR. I think once a player's at 50, you can start asking, hey, why is this player a Hall of Famer? And then around 60, you can start asking, well, how could this player not be a Hall of Famer? I mean, you're in a range with, in terms of Bobby Abreu, you're in a range with Vladimir Guerrero Sr. at that point, at about 60 WAR there. This is the classic Bobby Abreu stat I came up with. He is a member of the 400 stolen base, 1,400 walk, 2,400 hit club. These are all guys that would essentially be incredible modern leadoff hitters, and it's him alongside Barry Bonds, Ricky Henderson, Joe Morgan, and Eddie Collins. Who are all, obviously easy Hall of Famers with the exception of Bonds because of the PEDs. But yeah, I mean, Bobby Abreu, because he's up to 15%, even though it's going to take a lot to get from there to 75%, I almost wouldn't totally count him out because, players who get at least 50% of the writers' vote tend to get in via the Veterans Committee eventually. So, it may seem pointless to support Bobby Abreu or talk about Bobby Abreu's Hall of Fame case because he is ultimately destined, it seems, to spend 10 years on the ballot and then fall off without coming particularly close. But it would be interesting to see over the next 5 years or so, like how much momentum can he continue to gain, because the fact that he's made it this far is shocking because he had 0 Hall of Fame vibes, even if he does have, to some degree, Hall of Fame stats. And then finally, replacing Todd Helton in the trendy sabermetric darling club is Chase Utley. I pounded my fist on the table for Chase Utley. You can go back and watch last year's ballot breakdown to see the full sort of sabermetric breakdown and all the great reasons why Chase Utley should be a Hall of Famer and why I feel so strongly about that. But the thing about Chase Utley is that even though he debuted very strong at 29%, I would consider that to be a good, strong debut for him. That gives me hope that he will get in via the writers' ballot eventually. He's got, 9 more years to go, so he's got time. But the soft barrier here of the 2,000 hits for the non-catcher is the thing that he's ultimately going to have to overcome. And I know some of you watching this are saying, Bailey, why do you care so much about these arbitrary stat cutoffs? Who cares about the difference between 1,900 hits and 2,000 hits? I'll tell you who cares. The people who vote, the baseball writers. And they're better than me. And they're better than you. This is not an analysis necessarily of who's deserving to get into the Hall of Fame, because I believe Chase Utley is totally deserving. This is an analysis of what the voters think. There is a difference between these two things. I can say, I think Chase Utley should be a Hall of Famer, but will he be? With a debut at 29%, I'm hoping so. I'm feeling optimistic about that because it's not just about Chase Utley. It's about a class of really well-rounded second basemen who have been ignored historically. Guys like Lou Whitaker, guys like Bobby Grich, they should be in the Hall of Fame as well. And I think if Utley gets in via the writers' ballot, then that would set the stage for those guys eventually in the Veterans Committee. Next up, we have the scandalized players, and did you know that this very successful entrepreneur named Alex Rodriguez was also a baseball player? I wouldn't have known. I only know him for his business success win money moves, but apparently he played baseball before that, and apparently he was very good, but apparently he got caught up in the PED stuff, most notably the biogenesis scandal, which took place after regular testing was implemented, after baseball had already had its come to Jesus moment with the PEDs, and the sluggers went before Congress, and the blah, blah, blah. There's sort of 2 eras here of getting caught with PEDs. You could get caught in the Wild Wild West era, like Barry Bonds with the Balco scandal, or you get caught when you really should have known better, and that's the case here for Alex Rodriguez. And I'm just going to say it, I thought he had a chance to sort of charm and girl boss everyone and be on everyone's TV every day so that we think, hey, Alex Rodriguez, he's a great guy. Let's vote for him. He's got amazing stats. Who cares that he cheated? I thought maybe he could break the dam with regards to PED use in the Hall of Fame. It's Jover. It is so Jover. It is so unbelievably Jover for him. First year on the ballot, 34%. Second year, 36%. Third year, 35%. It is stagnant. There are no gains to be made here. Those 35% of people will keep voting for him, but there's nothing more. It is Jover. It is so completely Jover for him. Any attempt to rehabilitate his image and girl boss his way into the Hall of Fame, not gonna happen. We've seen it with PD guys in the past. They reach their ceiling and they stay there. Andy Pettitte's an interesting one because he is a rare case where someone really fessed up and was publicly very sorry. He said specifically that he used HGH while recovering from injury. And the other thing about Andy Pettitte is there's too many T's. There's too many T's in his last name. If it was 2 T's here and 1 T here, that'd be fine. If it was 2 T's here and 1 T here, that would be fine. But to have a stretch of 5 letters and 4 of them are the letter T, I find that to be excessive. Andy Pettitte, because of those PD connections, not really getting much shine on this ballot. I think most likely, destined to remain on the ballot for the full 10 years without really threatening to get in at any point. And the one thing Pettitte has going for him, among others, is that he is one of the greatest postseason pitchers of all time. That's his reputation. He pitched a lot in the postseason because he pitched for a lot of postseason-bound teams, particularly with the Yankees. But yeah, that's Andy Pettitte. And curiously enough to me, if we use the baseball reference player comparison tool, there is a version of Pettitte without the PED stigma that is on this ballot right now, and it's CC Sabathia, apart from the fact that both, Yankees southpaws, although Sabathia is certainly not that for his whole career. He played for some good Cleveland teams. I think Sabathia, honestly, should probably go in with a Milwaukee Brewers cap, because that was the team he was best with, as short as a stint it was. But the numbers are so similar. I mean, similar amount of innings, very similar amount of wins and losses, similar ERA plus. Sabathia has more strikeouts, but fundamentally, these are basically the same pitchers having the same career. The only difference, Pettitte has the PED stigma attached to them, so it's going to, that's going to languish. He's just going to be on the ballot for 10 years and not get close to getting in. CC Sabathia, probably going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Omar Vizquel is still on the ballot. People are still voting for him. Not only that, someone has already added him to their ballot that didn't vote for him last year. Curious. I'm just saying, curious. Omar Vizquel, early in his candidacy, got up to 50%, which basically meant he was going to get in. And then very quickly, we see headlines about domestic violence and abuse against his wife. We see headlines about abusing an autistic bat boy when he was coaching. So because of that, his campaign is effectively dead in the water. And it's almost, kind of boring to talk about. He is like sort of the PED tainted guys destined to stay on this for the full 10 years, but not get particularly close. But his case is somewhat interesting because A, he was going to get in. He was at 50% very early in his candidacy. Of course, he was going to get up to 75 somehow by year 10. And then it turns out he seems like a bad guy. Seems like kind of a scumbag to me based on some of the headlines that have come up. Otherwise, it would have been interesting because, look, by OPS or OPS plus, he'd be one of the worst hitters in the Hall of Fame. But also, I don't necessarily think I would fault anyone for being like, hey, if an 11-time Gold Glove shortstop has almost 3,000 career hits, should they be in? I'd say, yeah, I mean, you could do a lot worse than that, right? I'm not such a, sabermetric freak that I can't respect someone with 400 stolen bases and nearly 3,000 career hits and 11-time Gold Glover and the oldest shortstop to ever play the game. But unfortunately, because Omar Vizquel, not a nice guy, we can't really talk about his candidacy other than, LOL, this guy was about to get in, and then we found out he's the worst person of all time. And the final scandalized player is Carlos Beltran. The scandal, particularly for him, is the Houston Astros 2017 sign stealing scandal. Did a video about that, a retrospective, if you will, very recently on my main channel, Foolish Baseball. Again, stop saying this is my main channel. My main channel is Foolish Baseball, not Foolish Bailey. But Carlos Beltran, that's really the only thing that has sort of slowed him down. He debuted 2 years ago at 47%, then he gained plus 10% to get up to 57%. So heading into year 3, he's in a very strong position. He would really only need to add 2 or 3% every year to get in by year 10. I think he'll probably get in before year 10. I don't think he's going to have any issue. I think when Altuve's time comes up, he's not going to have any issue at all. I mean, Altuve a non-participant in the scheme in a lot of ways, although he did still benefit in the sense that his teammates were doing it. But I digress. The point with Carlos Beltran is this may have slowed him down, but it's not going to stop him. Unlike the other scandalized players, he is actually in a very good position to get into the Hall of Fame, and most likely it'll be before year 10. Maybe some voters kind of held off on him in the first year because that was his de facto punishment. But as time passes, the legacy and the impact of the 2017 Astros cheating scandal will pass as well. And Carlos Beltran will be the benefit on the ballot first and foremost. Does he have the case statistically? Yeah, I mean, he does. If you go by center field jaws, he's right on the average of what a Hall of Fame center fielder looks like. Everyone ahead of him is in the Hall of Fame or is named Mike Trout. So, I mean, that's a pretty good sign. Here he is compared to Andre Dawson, who is also a Hall of Famer inducted by the writer's ballot. Their numbers are eerily similar. Yes, Carlos Beltran is a Hall of Famer. He is going to be a Hall of Famer. It's just that maybe this Astros cheating scandal stopped him from being a first or second ballot Hall of Famer and may instead make him, I don't know, a fifth or sixth ballot Hall of Famer. This next category of players, I'm going to call them, we're still here. These guys, they're still here. They aren't necessarily trendy sabermetric darlings, but they do get over 5% of the vote, and that's why they're still here. Jimmy Rollins, this is his 4th year on the ballot. He got 15% of the vote last year, so his position on the ballot, I would say, for the entire run through year 10 is secure at this point. Has some Hall of Fame marks you look at. He has, 2,400 hits. He has nearly 500 career steals. He has an MVP award that he probably shouldn't have won, but you know what? He won it anyways. And you know who votes for those? Baseball writers. You know who votes for the Hall of Fame? Baseball writers. So there is a case to be made here for Jimmy Rollins. I'm personally not going to make the case. He was a below average hitter with a 95 OPS plus over the course of his career, even if, at times at his best, he was an above average hitter for the length of his career. Below average, not a particularly interesting candidate for me. Kind of quintessential Hall of Fame good, but he's still here. You know who else is still here? Mark Buehrle. Mark Buehrle, this is his 5th year on the ballot, up to 8%, so still kind of on that bubble, right? If he loses enough voters this year, he could fall off the ballot. When I have done my mock ballot, which I will do at the end of this, I have voted for Mark Buehrle, not every year, but most of the years. And you know why? Because I like Mark Buehrle, and I think there are, there's more than one way to skin a cat when it comes to putting together a Hall of Fame career. Maybe you had a great peak, but you didn't have, excellent bookends. Or you can be a guy like Mark Buehrle who is just maybe not a Hall of Fame peak at all, but was just so consistent for so many years that you look at him and you say, hey, I mean, this is in some ways the antithesis of the modern pitcher that everyone laments watching today. Mark Buehrle, he was going out there, he didn't need a pitch clock. He was throwing at pitches, as quickly as he possibly could, just shuffling around there on the mound, all amped up on energy drinks. 3,000 career innings easily, 200 wins, 59 WAR. So what, he didn't win a Cy Young? So what, he didn't even come all that close to winning a Cy Young? Like, he was just so consistent year over year. One of the greatest defensive pitchers of all time, made probably the greatest defensive play a pitcher has ever made. And the thing with Buehrle is that I would also kind of point out as an advantage, and just to appreciate what he did in his consistency. His 15th best season is probably better than most Hall of Famers' 15th best season. That's just who he was. He was consistent. I vote for him in the mock a lot of times. Does he have a chance to get in via the writer's ballot? No. And of course, they know better than I do. I'm stupid. I'm foolish. But I do like Mark Buehrle, and I hope you do too. Francisco Rodriguez, a.k.a. K-Rod, is also still here. Here's the thing about K-Rod, and here's the thing about K-Rod's candidacy. It's not that interesting right now. He got 8% of the vote last year. But once Billy Wagner is off this ballot, so going into next year's, it could get interesting because at that point he is going to be, I believe, the best reliever on the ballot. I haven't looked down the pipeline, but I do think, yeah, he would be the best reliever on the ballot for quite some time. Certainly in terms of career saves, right? He's going to wait at least, 5 more years before Jansen or Kimbrel would join him. They are ahead of him in career saves. They both passed him this past year, but the only players ahead of him after that, Lee Smith, Trevor Hoffman, Martin Rivera, they're on the Hall of Fame, right? So that's the case for Francisco Rodriguez. He saved a bunch of games. He has the single season save record. He, was so fun to watch. Like he came up, he was pitching for the 2002 Angels in the World Series, even though he had basically no high leverage big league experience before that. And he had this amazing career. Not an interesting candidate for me now. Someone who I would consider voting for in a mock maybe later. I voted for Joe Nathan. I liked Joe Nathan a whole lot. I don't see why I couldn't vote for Francisco Rodriguez, but I think it gets really interesting for him in particular once Billy Wagner is gone from this ballot, because then I think people may gain a new perspective on what K-Rod did throughout his career. Torii Hunter is also still here. He got 7% of the vote last year, and I'm a little surprised he's still here until I remember, oh yeah, this guy has 350 homers and 2,400 hits and 50 WAR, and he's a center fielder and a 9-time Gold Glover. Duh, of course he's still going to be here. Quintessential Hall of Very Good player for me. I mean, I think he's just going to hang around the ballot for 10 years and not get particularly close. But at this point, he's probably more at risk of falling off the ballot than induction at any point during his candidacy. He's still here. Torii Hunter, still here. And then there's David Wright, who got 6% of the vote, managed to barely hang on to his position on the ballot in his first year last year. I correctly predicted that. I said Wright was kind of a toss-up to reach that 5%, but ultimately I said, yeah, I think he will, and he did, and he is still here. I wonder if he's at any threat to fall off the ballot. I think if you're able to make some gains here and get up to, 8 or 9%, that'd be a really nice cushion for him to solidify the fact that he will be part of this ballot for at least, the 10-year run that he has. Just a great player. Obvious Hall of Fame peak. I mean, through age 30, this is what a Hall of Fame career looks like. And then after age 30, not a lot of production to speak of. Obviously, the injuries are why that is. A beloved player, Captain America, etc. David Wright is still here, and I would like for him to be here for the foreseeable future. And now I'm going to do the rest of the newcomers who I don't think really have a shot to reach 5%. So I think these are effectively the guaranteed one-and-dones on this ballot. But we're going to take some time to respect them because even being included on a Hall of Fame ballot, you have to have had a very good career. First of all, at a minimum, you need to have played 10 seasons, which most players don't get to do at all. And then you need to have been pretty good in those 10-plus seasons as well. Great example of this is Ian Kinsler, who is sort of the platonic ideal of guy who has more career WAR than you thought he did. And that's because he is a second baseman who played good but not sexy defense and hit for some pop at a position that historically hasn't had that much pop. That is the legacy for Ian Kinsler, who retired with 1,999 hits. If he had a 2,000th, I still don't think he'd necessarily have a shot to break 5%, but he had an excellent career. He was an excellent, underrated player for most of his career, and only now, thanks to a stat like WAR, can we go back and say, oh wow, 54. That's a lot. That's more than some Hall of Famers. Troy Tulowitzki is on the ballot as well. You would have thought you would have seen him maybe a couple years ago, but he did come back for the 2019 Yankees after a hiatus. That postponed his eventual appearance on this Hall of Fame ballot. He had one career home run for the Yankees. He will always be a Yankee legend. But Tulo, if you want to hear me say some nice things about Tulo, go find the Tulo video on Foolish Baseball. Basically, the thing that I always loved about Tulo was that he was this prototypical big-bodied shortstop before that had truly become the norm. I mean, first it was like Cal Ripken Jr., and then Jeter and A-Rod, and then Tulo is really sort of the bridge between that and what we see now with guys like Correa or Seager. Tulo's kind of the bridge to that. A clear and obvious Hall of Fame talent. Just in terms of the talent he had, yes, he played like a Hall of Famer for many years, essentially his 20s, and then like David Wright, the injuries, and, a lot of times you just need those 30s to get to the counting stats, and you have the Hall of Fame peak in the 20s, and he just didn't make much of his 30s because of the injuries. It's unfortunate because he was uber talented. Tulo, thank you so much. I loved your career. Most likely you are a one and done. One of Tulo's teammates with the Colorado Rockies, Carlos Gonzalez, is here, aka Cargo. Cargo, you know what? Not a bat flipper. Not a bat flipper. Some people think he was a bat flipper. No, he was a bat dropper and home run admirer. And that's why some people took offense to that. He dropped and he admired. Not a flip, a drop and an admire. Beyond that, the thing I'll always remember, the ultimate sort of Cargo memory, is the walk-off home run to end a cycle. That is one of the coolest things that has ever happened in like a regular season game. The walk-off home run on the first pitch of the 9th inning to complete the cycle. Had some really good years, particularly with Colorado. You can see a batting title here with 197 hits, 34 bombs, 26 stolen bases. Played some good defense in the outfield as well at his defensive peak. Great career. Not a Hall of Famer, but good for him for appearing on the ballot. Our next likely one and done is the Grandy man himself, Curtis Granderson, a very beloved ball player and just person, beloved as a human being, a Clemente Award winner, which I'm sure is something he's very proud of. I'm glad that's on baseball reference pages. I think that's just a nice little thing to acknowledge. Yeah, way to be a humanitarian, Curtis Granderson, among other things. Very good baseball player. In some ways here, I would say the stats are comparable to Torii Hunter, who has stuck around, but I don't think Curtis Granderson is going to stick around. At his peak, I'll remember him as a great power-hitting center fielder for the New York Yankees. He played for many teams. He was great for Detroit, but he had a shorter stint with the Yankees that was just really, really good, and that included back-to-back 40-homer seasons. And you can see that's not that common, particularly at center field. Here are center fielders with 40 home runs in a season. Since integration, those who did it multiple times up here. You can see he's in pretty good company there. So Curtis Granderson, congrats on a great career. I mean, it's been over for 5 years now. And yeah, way to go, Grandy man. Adam Jones is up next. We've talked a little bit of Felix Hernandez. We've talked a little bit of run support. I think Felix Hernandez would have potentially benefited in his career if he had Adam Jones boosting the lineup for the Mariners. Unfortunately, they traded him for Eric Bedard, and we kind of know how that went. Baltimore Orioles got the best of that trade. At his peak, Adam Jones was a 4-time consecutive All-Star, also an All-Star in 2009. Very good player. Later on in his career, he kind of tapered off quickly because he essentially became a tweener. He wasn't good enough offensively to be an everyday corner outfielder, but he wasn't good enough defensively to be a center fielder. And so his career kind of tapered off quickly, 1 year with Arizona in 2019, and then he was done at the major league level, but he was not done playing professional baseball because he very wisely goes over to Japan, plays a couple years in Japan, and that's kind of what I'll remember Adam Jones for in some way, was how much he loved it there, how much he embraced the fans and the culture in Japan, how great of an ambassador he was for the game of baseball and for America during his time in Japan. And I know that's, for some people, that's sort of just the tail end of his career. That's just something that happened. But, I mean, he was teammates with Yoshinobu Yamamoto. He played for Oryx, which is Ichiro's team, and just the way he talks about it, such a positive experience for him and his family. So when I think Adam Jones, yes, I think Orioles, yes, I think World Baseball Classic catch, but I also think, wow, he had a great time in Japan. Good for him. The next likely one and done is Hanley Ramirez. Here's a good example of a guy who was clearly on a Hall of Fame pace early in his career. You look at his numbers through about age 25 right here. This is what a Hall of Famer's numbers look like through age 25. He had 23 WAR. His OPS was over 900. Here are all the shortstops, by the way, through age 25 who had an OPS over 900. You've got Willie Wells, who's in the Hall of Fame, Negro Leaguer. Alex Rodriguez, who, would be a Hall of Famer if not for the PED. Nomar was a guy who was on Hall of Fame pace through his 20s, and then Arky Vaughan, who's maybe the most underrated historic baseball player ever. I mean, this guy was an absolute insanely good bat for a shortstop. And then there's Hanley. So he was in a pretty rarefied air already early in his career, just with how he could swing the stick as a young shortstop. He didn't last his whole career at shortstop. He goes to LA. He does some good, some bad. You can see he had this amazing 2013 where he got MVP votes despite only playing 86 games. He ends up signing a contract with the Red Sox, and that turns into an albatross. He doesn't really generate any value for the Red Sox, and his career is done after that. But really through, the earlier stages of his career, Hanley was someone who it seemed like could have very well been a Hall of Famer. It just didn't work out for him. Fernando Rodney, he was fun. He was just so fun. He tilted the hat sideways to honor his father, who was a fisherman, and wore his hat the same way to protect himself from the same sun angles he was facing every day while out fishing. And then he shot the arrow. He pulled the arrow from his back and he shot the arrow. Fernando Rodney was so much fun. I loved Fernando Rodney. I loved every minute of the Fernando Rodney experience, and he does have 327 saves, and I think 300 for the modern closer is like the absolute bare minimum to receive any sort of consideration, so he does at the very least hit that mark. I think the funny thing about Fernando Rodney and sort of the reputation he had as a heart attack-inducing closer is the ERA. He had a 3.8 ERA, a 110 ERA plus, which means even though at his peak he was incredible, like 2012 with Tampa, this is one of the great modern closer seasons of all time. But for the totality of his career, he was essentially an above average pitcher, like slightly above average reliever in terms of run prevention. And most of those guys tend to be, 6th, 7th, 8th inning guys, but he just kept getting closing jobs, and he just kept closing, and he finished with over 300 saves. So I'm sure in terms of pitchers with 300 saves, he is probably one of the worst in terms of run prevention. That is the joy of the Fernando Rodney experience. Not expecting him to get much shine on this ballot, but of course, a beloved player. And finally, the last player on this ballot to talk about appropriately starts with Z, Ben Zobrist. No shot he'll reach 5% of the vote needed to sustain his Hall of Fame candidacy on this writer's ballot. But all I gotta say is, just keep an eye out on the Foolish Baseball channel, all right? There may be someone who has a different opinion from the majority of baseball writers. Even though they're smart, even though they are infallible in their genius, there's maybe someone who just has a soft spot for Ben Zobrist and may very well on this very mock ballot throw on a vote for Ben Zobrist and then later explain why on a separate YouTube channel. So that's Ben Zobrist for you, the utility man himself. And now it's time for the mock ballot. Emphasis on mock. I am not a voter for this thing. I am not a member of the BBWAA. The 400 veteran members of the BBWAA who vote for this are all smarter than me. They're all better looking than me. They're all funnier than me. They're all more charismatic than me. And that's why they're doing this. And I'm just a pathetic YouTuber LARPing as a baseball writer. If only I could someday be a baseball writer. If only someday I could be someone in this industry. For now, I would be lucky just to pick up their dry cleaning. 2025 Hall of Fame ballot. Here's how I do it. I think I'd start with Bobby Abreu. Just a fun sabermetric pick. No Hall of Fame vibes in his career. Nobody watched Bobby Abreu play and was like, yep, I'm watching a future Hall of Famer, but he has stuck around on this ballot. I'm going to go for him with my first pick. Next up is going to be Carlos Beltran. I hope some of you have seen the retrospective I put together on Foolish Baseball of the Astros scandal 5 years later. I think it sort of puts it into an important perspective about while the Astros scandal was unique in the sense that they came up with a method of cheating that was not reliant on a base runner system. A lot of teams were using base runner systems, and honestly, the system the Astros used was fairly short-lived given the extent of their dominance over the last decade or so. And Beltran was, a Hall of Famer before that statistically anyways. He didn't really need that World Series. Anyways, I'm voting for Beltran. I'm also voting for Buehrle, another sort of Foolish Baseball darling. Check out the speedrunner video from, gosh, I guess that was like 4 years ago now. I'm old. I'm like 30 next year, guys. Is it over for me? Is it over? Next is going to go Andruw Jones. Very important figure from my Braves childhood. He gets the 4th vote for me. You can vote up to 10 players. I'm just going to let you know I'm going to vote for 10 players. So next up for me, I'm going to skip Martin and McCann and Pedroia. I think they do kind of have a case, but I'm going to go A-Rod. I'll go A-Rod right here. For me, it's kind of like the steroid tax is what I have in mind. The idea that, okay, if we take away, 20 or 30% of your production, are you still a Hall of Famer? You kind of have to up the standards a little bit. It's like, yes, I'll vote for A-Rod. Maybe I won't vote for Sheffield or Palmeiro, but I would vote for like Bonds or Clemens. I don't know. That's just kind of been my approach. Maybe it's logically inconsistent. Maybe it isn't. Then we've got a couple newcomers after that. It's going to be CC Sabathia and Ichiro, both getting votes. I think that will be the case for many actual baseball writer voters. I think both these guys will get in year one. And then I'm going to go Chase Utley. who is for me a sabermetric darling. This is not just for Chase Utley. This is for Bobby Grich and Lou Whitaker. This is just a really well-rounded player who I think had a clear Hall of Fame peak and left an indelible mark on the game. That is 8. I have now voted for 8. That means I have 2 more. I'm going to go Billy Wagner with number 9. I hope that he will flip enough writers to get in. I almost assume he has to. He was so close, and people tend to get a year 10 bump. And then finally, watch this space for more news on how I feel about Ben Zobrist's Hall of Fame candidacy. You may laugh now, but I'm going to make the case. I will make the case for you, just not here, just not now. There is a time and place for everything. So those are the 10 I'm voting for, but I'm also going to introduce sort of a new category of player, which is players I would consider if there weren't a 10-vote limit. So I would consider voting for Felix. I think there's a lot of merits to the argument for Felix that I sort of laid out, where he's just kind of in this pitcher dead zone where, you know, unfortunately for him, he's got Scherzer and Kershaw and Greinke and Verlander falling up after him, so there's not going to be this crisis of the pitcher position in the Hall of Fame, but that crisis is coming. It's coming with DeGrom, with Sale, with Cole, and especially even after them as well. And Felix is just kind of going to be stuck in this dead zone, basically, where his stats are going to be very comparable to future pitchers that get into the Hall of Fame, just not current ones. So, and also clear Hall of Fame peak. Oh my gosh. I mean, he kind of suffers from the Andruw Jones thing, where what if it was just a little bit later and a little bit more balanced? So I'd consider him. I'd consider the catchers on here, the newbies, Russell Martin, Brian McCann, because, you know, by F4, they are, I would say, deserving. So they are definitely under consideration for me. I would consider K-Rod. I think there's merits to the K-Rod argument. I'm not super into relievers in the Hall of Fame, but I've kind of turned out that way just because when you look at a lot of guys, when you look at, you know, Joe Nathan in the past, who was, I believe, a one and done, I thought there was merit there. I think there's merit with K-Rod as well. I think being the single season record holder is a pretty cool accomplishment. And then David Wright is the sort of the 5th player I would consider throwing a vote to, not voting for any of these 5 because of the limit, but they are at least intriguing to me for the future if they can manage to stick around on the ballot. So I've given you my opinion. Now we're going to do predictions. This is how I think the voting is going to go down. First and foremost, I think there will be 3 players inducted via the writer's ballot this voting cycle. Those 3 players are going to be CC Sabathia. He's going to get in. Ichiro is going to get in as well. And then the 3rd is going to be Billy Wagner. The first 2, it's year 1 for them. Billy Wagner, it is year 10. If I can make some predictions on top of that, I don't think Ichiro will be unanimous. I think he will finish with less than 100% of the vote. I think CC is going to be somewhere in the 80s, would be my guess. And, you know, for Wagner, it doesn't really matter, but he will at least get over that 75. So I think that's where it starts with these 3 getting into the Hall of Fame. Then you have sort of the bubble candidates, the players that may or may not get to that 5% threshold. My prediction there is going to be, I don't think Russell Martin or Brian McCann will get there. I think they're both destined to be one and dones. I think this is a case of, you know, you aren't ready for this, but your kids are going to love it, to quote Back to the Future. The guys who I think can stay on, I think Felix can stay on. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think Felix can stay on. And I also think just because Wright stayed on, I think maybe Pedroia stays on. So I'm going to predict Pedroia and Felix to stay on and to get to the 5%. I can't say the same about McCann and Martin. It's kind of hard to read the tea leaves here. We don't have really any sort of sample, any healthy sample of data from the tracker just yet. More on that later. But yeah, I think Pedroia, Felix on, McCann, Martin off. And I think if there's any returning player that might fall off, it might be Torii Hunter. Signs would also point to Wright, but it could be Torii Hunter. I just wonder. I wonder about Torii Hunter and his candidacy this year. And then final predictions for players who are creeping towards Hall of Fame induction, although I don't think they'll get in this year. I think they've still got a shot to get in into the future. I think it's going to be a year of sort of modest gains once again for Andruw Jones. I don't think he's going to get too much going for him. I mean, he'll go up, but it won't be by a lot. The guy who I think is going to get a big gain is Carlos Beltran. I think he's going to near closer and closer to 75%, put him into a pretty good spot for the near future. That's how I think this round of Hall of Fame balloting is going to go. But if you want to track how it's going, I've got just the site for you. The BBWAA members voting on this thing have no obligation to make their ballots public, although many of them do. About half of them will over the next few weeks. This tracker has just gotten started. It comes courtesy every year of Ryan Thibodeau and team, and this is the 2025 edition of the tracker. So whenever a writer chooses to publish their ballot to the public, they keep track, and you can at least get some idea of what's coming down the pipeline as more and more ballots are added. They only have 10 public ballots plus 2 anonymous/unverifiable ballots, so it's only 3% of ballots out there. So you can't really draw meaningful conclusions from this, other than the fact that Ichiro still has a chance to be unanimous, and Sabathia still has a chance to be unanimous, technically, because no one has revealed a ballot that says otherwise. But yeah, keep in touch with that for the coming weeks. Again, right now, it's a very small sample size, so no real meaningful conclusions can be drawn from it. But maybe when they get to 50 or 100 ballots, we can really start to check in with some of these candidates. So, as always, thank you to Ryan Thibodeau and team for everything they do with the Baseball Hall of Fame tracker. So if my instincts are correct, and I think they are, there are going to be 3 Hall of Famers inducted via the writer's ballot this year. That would be Ichiro, CC Sabathia, and Billy Wagner. But that's not the only Hall of Fame voting going on. There's also the Veterans Committee. This year's Veterans Committee takes a look at players whose primary contributions to the game came before 1980, and these are the 8 names listed on the ballot. Typically, in a typical year, I would say you'll see about maybe 2 get inducted. So we're going to break down these candidacies as well, because the voting for that is actually going on today as of the video's posting, and will be announced tonight in a few hours. This committee consists of 16 people, so in order to reach induction, Dick Allen and everyone else on this ballot will need to receive at least 12 votes to hit that 75% threshold. Dick Allen is the worst Hall of Fame snub right now. I think of all the players who are not in the Hall of Fame, excluding the steroid guys like Barry Bonds, excluding Pete Rose, excluding Shoeless Joe Jackson, this is the worst snub, just purely based on performance reasons. Now, one reason Dick Allen was kind of held out of the Hall of Fame and never, was as loved in his career or his post-playing career as he should have been is because he had a reputation of being a little bit of a prickly personality. You can see right here, he played for a bunch of different teams, which was not typical. This was not a time of, a lot increased player movement. Most of his career came before the reserve clause was abolished, meaning if you were a star player, you would generally play your whole career for one team. Dick Allen did not do that. He would ask to be traded. And the thing about that is, if I could just explain it, there's a real, I wouldn't even say racial undertones to the way that people would discuss Dick Allen. I would say racial overtones. There's less subtle than that. Dick Allen comes from a generation of ball player that was not the first to integrate Major League Baseball. And I think the attitude for a lot of those first group of black players to integrate Major League Baseball, they kind of had an attitude of like, turn the other cheek, keep your head down, don't cause too much of a fuss. Even, Hank Aaron found Willie Mays to be a little bit too showboaty, that it was like that back then. And then you had the second generation, and Dick Allen is part of that second generation. He knew growing up that there would not be that barrier. He knew that he would be able to play Major League Baseball against, the best white and the best black competition. And because of that, the attitude is a little bit different. So Dick Allen is very much cut from the same cloth as someone like Reggie Jackson. He knows who he is. He's proud. If someone was, racist to him, he would not stand for it. He would, cause a big fuss. This is a good thing, by the way, just to be clear. But that is kind of how he got this reputation of being, for example, a bad teammate. And it was really just, quite frankly, kind of unfounded. And so it's been a really unfair and hard thing for him. Statistically, the thing he's got kind of going against him is that he was a hitter whose career basically took place in what is referred to as the second dead ball era. He was 26 years old in 1968. That means some of the counting stats aren't as impressive as they otherwise could be. But he still eclipsed 350 home runs. He doesn't have 2,000 hits, which we've known has been a difficult sort of soft barrier for some. He does have an MVP award in 1972 with the White Sox with an incredible 199 OPS plus. And the big thing here is, I think, using that OPS plus, that is a, park and offensive environment adjusted metric. And when you look at that, that's what makes Dick Allen a no-brainer, right? That's what makes him a no-brainer. He has a career 912 OPS and 156 OPS plus. The reason Dick Allen should be in the Hall of Fame is dead simple. On a rate basis, he is one of the greatest right-handed hitters of all time. You can see he ranks tied for 6th with Frank Thomas. Ahead of him, Hank Greenberg, Mark McGwire, Jimmy Fox, Mike Trout, Rogers Hornsby. So that's why this is a no-brainer. This is why, Dick Allen should have been in the Hall of Fame years ago. This is why it's sad that Dick Allen did not live to get to see his own induction. He passed away in 2020 at the age of 78, but hopefully this year the Veterans Committee can right the wrongs of previous Veterans Committees. He's come up short a couple times with 11 votes when he needed 12 on these committees, and I really hope this is the year for Dick Allen, who is the worst Hall of Fame snub, all things considered. Next up is Ken Boyer, a third baseman that is an archetype of a player that has been sort of underrated throughout the Hall of Fame balloting process. It's not just him, it's sort of third basemen, particularly well-rounded ones who followed. Ones like Buddy Bell or Greg Nettles, and I think even, if I could make a contemporary comparison, someone like Evan Longoria may find himself in a spot similar to the one that Ken Boyer is in right now. Ken Boyer, just a well-rounded third baseman, maybe not the gaudiest of counting stats, but you look at the WAR and it's above 60. That's pretty darn good. He also, unlike Nettles or Bell or Longoria, has an MVP award. So that's a big difference maker for him potentially as well. And that's maybe one reason why he's been selected for this committee, is that he has that MVP award. As far as breaking down the candidacy here, I don't necessarily like his chances. I think he's an intriguing candidate. I think he is in some ways that third base analog for the guys we talked about, like Whitaker or Bobby Grich. But yeah, I don't love his chances here on the ballot, but it's an interesting inclusion, and there are certainly far less interesting inclusions on this ballot than Ken Boyer. The next candidate is John Donaldson, and this is a case where I hope the Veterans Committee, all 16 members, are willing to sort of do their research. I hope they get a good understanding of why this player is up on the ballot, because if you went on his baseball reference page and you looked at his stats in major Negro leagues, you wouldn't get the impression that this is a potential Hall of Fame candidate. He was a slightly above average hitter. You'd also get the impression he was primarily a hitter, a center fielder more so than a pitcher. He's up on the ballot as a pitcher, despite not having too many innings pitched in major Negro leagues. And the thing about John Donaldson is many of his contributions came outside of the major Negro leagues that were centralized and organized by people like Rube Foster. In fact, he's sort of a generation that played a lot of his career before those came into being in 1920. So instead, John Donaldson was a barnstormer. Basically, he would act as a fundraising tool, and he would go from town to town and basically destroy town ball teams. And so what John Donaldson has is a network of people that refer to themselves as the Donaldson Network. This is headed by the historian Peter Gorton. And what they do is they go back and they look at those newspaper box scores from John Donaldson's barnstorming days, and they start to put together a case for him. And the case is pretty impressive. He has over 400 verified wins. He has over 5,000 verified strikeouts. So this is, pretty clearly one of the most talented pitchers from that era. But it's sort of tough to make that comparison, because this was against, not the greatest of competition. I'm sure there were really good town ball teams, but he was not doing most of his playing in these major Negro leagues that were centralized and organized by people like Rube Foster, which is sort of makes him different from someone like, Satchel Paige, who has a long history, even though Satchel Paige barnstormed a ton as well. So he's kind of like has the Satchel Paige barnstorming element to his career, but he's almost of that generation before Paige, because Paige at least got to play a lot of his career in those organized leagues. John Donaldson, not the case. And I think it's sort of an interesting case study on how you would handle a player like this, a black baseball player who would not have been able to play Major League Baseball due to the color of his skin, and yet also played a lot before these organized leagues started to take place in 1920. I think I'm on board for it. I think it'd be a fun, unique inclusion into the Hall of Fame. I don't feel like this committee is going to feel the same way. I don't necessarily like his chances. Next up is Steve Garvey, and I don't want to be mean to Steve Garvey. I don't want to sound cruel to Steve Garvey, but this is just a really uninspired pick. It's really uninspired because this is someone who has been on these committees time and time and time again, and it's just more of the same. I mean, he certainly has the fame element of the Hall of Fame. He was a famous baseball player who was very appreciated in his time. He was a 10-time All-Star. He was an MVP winner. He has some of the counting stats you'd look for, 2,600 hits, close to 300 home runs. But there's just better infielders out there. There just are. Why not Lou Whitaker? Why not Bobby Grich? Why always Steve Garvey? Why always Steve Garvey? Yeah, it's just a really uninspired choice. Who knows? Maybe he'll get in, right? I mean, Gil Hodges was on like a million of these before he finally got inducted a couple years ago. But yeah, I mean, he's 38 WAR, and I don't need to be too much of a WAR literalist, but there are players out there with like 60 or 70 WAR who I'd be more interested in seeing than Steve Garvey. Again, it's just a really kind of lazy, uninspired choice for me. Next up is Vic Harris, and I think Vic Harris is a good example of the problem of categories sometimes when it comes to Hall of Fame induction. He could be inducted potentially as a player or a manager, and maybe even if he wasn't a Hall of Famer in one of those areas, if he's Hall of Very Good in two of those areas, I would be inclined to induct him either way. Vic Harris has been on one of these committees before. He received 10 votes. He's going to need 12 to get in. You can see his playing career right here. He was a 7-time All-Star in the Negro Leagues. He had a career 300 average, so he was a very good ball player. But I'll also throw on top of that, he was a player manager for the Homestead Grays, where he managed and was teammates with Josh Gibson. You can see the winning percentage there of .663. That is the highest winning percentage of any manager, threshold, 500 wins or whatever. That's the highest winning percentage. A lot of pennants. They won, a World Series equivalent in 1948. So very accomplished as a player and very accomplished as a manager. I don't know necessarily what to make of this candidacy. I don't know what to expect. I think the fact that he got 10 votes once is somewhat encouraging. I think it at least gives him the merit of reappearing on such a Veterans Committee ballot. But we'll just have to see. Next up is Tommy John. Can you believe they named this guy after the surgery? All jokes aside, this is a problem of categories once again, because you could argue for him almost as a pioneer of sorts, although maybe that argument would better be applied to someone like Dr. Frank Jobe, who invented the surgery in the first place while Tommy John was playing for the Dodgers. You can see it right there in 1975. Did not play eponymous surgical procedure. And famously, he was better after the procedure, or at least pitched longer after the procedure than before the procedure. So, considering his contributions to baseball history and how widespread this surgery has become, I think you could certainly make the argument. But I'm going to make a different sort of argument, which is just purely performance, purely numbers, purely what he did in his playing career, regardless of whether he tore his UCL and had an eponymous surgical procedure named after him. I guess maybe that was a little redundant to say, but here's Tommy John versus Jim Kaat, who was just recently inducted via the Veterans Committee himself. Tommy John is just a slightly better version of Jim Kaat. Slightly better ERA, slightly better ERA plus, slightly more wins, slightly fewer losses, slightly more innings. He's just a better version of Jim Kaat. These are both, lengthy accumulator type careers, maybe not with the sharpest and highest of Hall of Fame peaks, but just pitched a long time. We're talking 4,700 innings pitched here, people. 4,700. So I definitely think Tommy John deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, and I would probably say that whether or not the surgery he had even happened. Next up is Dave Parker, and I'm sure you're wanting me to roll my eyes and say he has 40 WAR and my name's Foolish Bailey, and the only thing I care about is a player's WAR. Oh, do they have 60 WAR? Put them in the Hall of Fame. Do they have less than 50? Take them out. This is the Hall of WAR. This is what I believe. I only believe in one stat. I only like WAR. All the other stats are stupid. I only like WAR. Dave Parker bad, 40 WAR. Ian Kinsler good, 54 WAR. No. You've got me all wrong. You've got me totally all wrong. I'm a pretty solid supporter of Dave Parker for the Hall of Fame because to some extent, and maybe I'm not giving Steve Garvey, this same benefit, but to some extent, it's can we judge these guys based on the standards that also existed when they played, right? Dave Parker has a career .290 batting average. Dave Parker has over 300 career home runs. He has over 2,700 career hits. He has an MVP award from 1978. He won 2 World Series, one with the Pirates and one with the Oakland A's right towards the end of his career. He has To me, a very clear Hall of Fame peak, a 5-year stretch where he averaged over 6 WAR per season and had a 147 OPS plus. If Dave Parker gets in via this Veterans Committee, I would be pretty happy. I mean, this is a very accomplished player, 2 batting titles, 3 Gold Gloves, 3 Silver Sluggers. Yeah, and I think just a very, beloved player from his era. Yeah, I'm actually supporting Dave Parker into the Hall of Fame. I think he's got a decent enough shot, although I think there's a couple of guys on this ballot who have a better chance. We'll get to that once we get to the predictions. Why isn't he in the Hall of Fame already? It's almost shocking because Luis Tiant is a very famous and very beloved pitcher who passed away just a couple months ago. He was one of the first big Cuban stars in the game. His dad, also named Luis Tiant, was a star in, black baseball and the Negro Leagues before him. And I don't know when it necessarily registered to me because, when I grew up, I knew Luis Tiant as a name of a, very important and successful baseball pitcher that was before my time. I don't know when I necessarily registered or clocked the fact that Luis Tiant isn't in the Hall of Fame because it just seems kind of absurd. I mean, he has 66 career WAR. He's over 200 wins. So, even if you were trying to keep him out, he didn't get to 200 wins. Yes, he did. He has 2 ERA titles. He probably should have won Cy Young Awards and just didn't. There's not much of a breakdown here for me. He should be in the Hall of Fame, and it's kind of shocking that he's not in the Hall of Fame. I think in that sense, he's sort of a Dick Allen analog, maybe just for pitchers, where it's like, yeah, this guy should be in the Hall of Fame. He should have been in the Hall of Fame a long time ago. What are we doing here? So here's one last look at the ballot. Because of how the votes can be split, they almost have to collude a little bit when they discuss certain players. You want to get at least 1 or 2 players in via this committee. And if you don't collude a little bit or find out how everyone else is going to vote, it's really hard for anyone to reach that 75% threshold because I think they are limited to the number of votes. I don't think they could just go in there and vote for everybody on this list. The ones that I'm particularly supportive of, I would say Dick Allen is number 1 for me. And then also like the pitchers, Tommy John and Luis Tiant, those would be 2 and 3. I support John Donaldson and I support Dave Parker in particular, although I don't think any of these are really all that bad. I think probably the outcome I'd be most disappointed in, to be honest with you, is Steve Garvey. Not because he was a terrible player, but just because I feel like, okay, that could have been somebody else, right? As far as my predictions, I think Tiant has the best shot here to get in. I feel like he is as close to a lock as I could probably give someone. So I'm going to give Tiant a pretty good shot. And then I think Dick Allen is maybe more on the borderline for me. They tend to induct 1 or 2. I think he could be the second. So maybe it's just wishful thinking because I'm such a big fan of Dick Allen. But I'm going to say this year it's Luis Tiant and Dick Allen joining Wagner and Ichiro and CC Sabathia in the Hall of Fame.